And I can walk, I won't trip.
So we have a lot of people out there on the internet watching, and thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. I want to remind you and everyone out there that after we get back from spring break, starting on the 8th of April, we'll be having a series of 3 workshops. So if you're interested, contact me or email me or get to me through Facebook. But we're in for a treat. We're going to have a discussion and talk here with Moira Hahn, and I'm really excited to see your work. So let's put our hands together.
Thank you. I want to thank David Michael and my friend Jane Bauman for inviting me here and Coastline College. I'm delighted to be here. Can you all hear me? Is the audio working okay? Okay, great. When I show my work, if you could do me a favor, wait till the end and then ask me questions if you have some. Be delighted to answer for you. But maybe it'll be a little bit easier to wait till the end, and I'll be happy to go back if there's a piece that you wanted to refer to. Okay? So without further ado, I will try and figure this out. So let's see. So I've been in California since 1975. I came out here to go to art college when I was a teenager, and I just stuck around. And I wanted to show you some really early work. Yeah, that's working. Because when I went to art college, I dropped out of high school to go to college. I was not that big on anything but art. That was my only interest. So dropped out of high school and went on to art college. And I had a wonderful professor. His name was Cyril Satorsky. He showed us some of the best work that had been done in the last few years. But I wondered how the artist got there, because I was just, a tadpole. I hadn't done anything yet. And he was showing us masterworks. And I thought there has to be a bridge somewhere. So I hope you'll forgive me for showing some of my earlier work that may not be as refined as my later work, but those of you that are students here, maybe it would be interesting to see some work from when you were just learning. So that's the thought. So I used to do black and white line illustrations for a number of different magazines and papers. And this is one that I did for a magazine in Berkeley called City Minor. And it's a line drawing with rapidograph, which is a technical black ink drawing pen. Okay, so 1978, I moved from the Bay Area, where I'd gone to undergraduate school, down to LA to go to CalArts and study experimental animation. I was really shocked by the pollution here. The Bay Area wasn't particularly polluted, but I moved to Silver Lake in LA, and it just seemed like going into an apocalypse. The freeways were a new experience for me. And so this is kind of like how I felt trying to navigate the 10 and the 405 freeway. It was absolutely terrifying. So around that time, I was living with an artist who was of Japanese ancestry. And he was doing very traditional Japanese work that looked like mid-century paintings and prints from the Edo period. I loved what he was doing, but I didn't want to do the same thing. So I got really interested in my own roots, which are half German Jewish and half Irish. So I went into German Expressionism and tried to learn everything I could about the 2 waves of the German Expressionist printmaking movement. So this is me again on the freeway. It's a little lino cut from about 1979. And I know exactly what I can remember. I was trying to get on the 10 freeway and I cut someone off by accident and they gave me hell and I was just completely freaked out. Then there was the experience of doing laundry and taking it back into the house after I dried it to hang, hung it to dry. And I bring it back in the house to be dirtier than before I washed it. I tried to grow a garden, but again, most of it didn't come out too well because it was really, really polluted and hot and things didn't take off the way I'd expected them to. So I used to want to get out of the house, and my friend and I would go up to the Griffith Observatory. And one time we were there, we're just hiking around. It was beautiful back there. And we saw these 2 little fawns eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. So I did a little print of that, and that's supposed to be in the background. Let's see if I can get the pointer to work. Up there, That's supposed to be the Griffith Observatory. It's not a sunset, it's actually architectural. Okay. Okay, so then the other thing I was interested in, I love German art. This is Egon Schiele. He's one of my favorite artists. So I was doing some portraits of my favorite artists. And then I was segueing from doing black and white drawings, very technical, tight drawings, into doing watercolor, which is what my significant other was a master at doing. So this is the first one where I took a work from Sunday Comics, an artist you may have heard of named Winsor McKay. And this is from one of his Sunday Comics, which at that time, this was done in about 1910, more than a century ago. They took up a huge section of the paper. One of the things I learned is that a lot of Americans over a century ago, they couldn't read, right? So the comics were a big part of the paper because they could enjoy it and they could just enjoy the artwork and the color and the narratives the way people do with manga now. And they didn't have to be able to read to get it. But anyway, this is Winsor McKay, but you can see that, oops, wrong direction. I translated that into a portrait of Los Angeles. So we have a fire-eating woman from a circus over in the left corner, and elephants with the 1970s style roller skates from Venice Beach in the lower right corner. This was actually my first watercolor painting, and I did it around 1979. So. And that kind of began a whole series of paintings. This was based on, what logo does strangling look like? Anybody know off the top of their head for a circus logo? Would that have been, which group of circus was strangling? Yeah, Ringling Brothers, but I made it Strangling, Los Angeles. And, oh yeah, we lived on Hyperion Avenue, and down the street there was, it's like, it's not a thrift store, but kind of like a vintage clothing store. So I had this really wonderful hibiscus pattern silky shirt. And my second painting was an elephant in a gas mask with my favorite silky shirt on. And then this was kind of two friends posed for this. And another issue I was dealing with, I was fresh out of college and grad school with a load of debt. And I had credit cards, and they kept raising the limit. I was hardly earning anything. I was just doing spot illustrations here and there and volunteering for people. But anyway, this is Astounding Plate Balancing, which is kind of a parody of my life, trying to balance my debts. Okay, back then, people would buy water from outside the supermarket. So I was thinking, what are the animals supposed to do? There's hardly any water, there's a drought, and they can't go and buy water. So this is a take from one of the Ringling Brothers posters, but I tried to incorporate a social message about water within it. Okay, so my boyfriend at the time was Masami Teraoka. This is a line drawing I did of him. And he decided it was too polluted, it was too hot, and he wanted to move to Hawaii because that was like Japan, but way more beautiful. So I went with him. And at first we rented a house from an artist named Ruth Tamura. And every day we'd have pancakes. And we also would go to Hanama Bay and snorkel. So here's a parrotfish behind a sofa composed of Bisquick pancakes. And the reading lamps are, I don't know, Aunt Jemima or whatever maple syrup we were using. The other thing, I was still interested in the whole issue about credit. So I started doing kind of parodies of old circus and magic posters that had to do with finance. And this was a take on a poster by a magician by the name of Keller. Initially it said credit with a C, and you can kind of see in the background, there's a bunch of little like demons back there. Okay, so they're all tempting this guy with different credit cards, Visa, MasterCard, American Express. They're up in the tree. I tried it with a C. It didn't work, so I wound up scraping the C out and going with a K, which is like the Germanic spelling for credit. It just looked better. Initially, this magician's name was up there. It said Keller. I found out the C just didn't cut it, so back to the K. All right, let's see. So I did a whole series on the magician Houdini, and as you all know, he was an escape artist, right? But I was trying to escape from my credit card debt. So we have this surgeon at the bottom who's recommending that people actually cut up their credit cards. So he's got in the jar there a rendered Visa card. These were pretty small paintings for the most part. The largest one might have been 20 by 30 inches. I was just getting started. Okay. Now, you would have to be my age to get this one, but does anyone recognize the figure in the back corner there? I'll give you a hint. It's a politician. This is around 1982. What do you think? It is Ronald Reagan. And what do we remember about Reagan's favorite candy? Anything? Jelly beans. So he's pelting this poor guy with jelly beans. Okay. And here's another one. I think I actually had one of those 76 Union cards. So it's an escape from the bondage of credit. Okay. I decided to try one in my friend's style. So we actually broke up and I moved back to LA. And I spent the next year doing aerobics like a mad woman for stress and eating tons of Haagen-Dazs. So it's kind of a vicious circle. But I wanted to know if I could do that style. I didn't do very many paintings like that. So I came back to Los Angeles. A friend let me crash indefinitely at his art loft downtown, which is really nice of him. And looking out over the freeways on my way to work, I got a job as doing mindless paperwork at a rent-a-car agency. I was kind of imagining Hanauma Bay. So, like the Goodyear blimp would fly over the freeway, and I was just seeing all the tropical fish from snorkeling around. So I got some commissions from that. A fellow named Chris Kennedy was partner, I believe, at Irell and Manella, which is an entertainment law firm. And he asked me to do the view from his corner office around the 18th floor in the style of that last painting that I just showed you. Oops. But he didn't want it that gloomy. He wanted bright and better definition. And initially, I had, you see the octopus? Okay, so he was pulling a guy out of the window. It was like a salaryman with a briefcase. But Chris didn't like that, so I had to repaint that part. Also, Masami, my ex, didn't want to do illustration anymore. So he was sending jobs to me. Are you seeing a screen on top of this? And what do we do with that? How do I close that? Thanks, sweetie. Okay, so he asked if I would do this piece, and this was for the New Yorker. And can any of you guys see that this person has spots on his arm down here, the front arm? Okay, so it was for a story in the New Yorker called AIDS in Japan. And they wanted something upbeat, but the story was about these individuals in Japan who found out that they had the disease AIDS. And if they went back to their family with that knowledge, they would be shunned, and then the whole family would be humiliated. So if they had to have a test for AIDS, they would fly to Honolulu, get tested in the US, and if they turned out positive, they would just stay in the US. They wouldn't go back because they didn't want the stigma to affect their family. So it's a tragic story, right? They wanted a cheerful illustration. It was a bit of a challenge. So I was looking again at silky shirts, and the kimono kind of has the pattern of the silky shirts that I had enjoyed in Los Angeles and Honolulu. And one thing I found out later, I thought the bats were really ominous. I thought they just looked cool, so I did lots of bats in it. I found out later in Chinese and Japanese art, bats are good luck. So they're bringing good fortune to this guy, and hopefully he's clear. And you can also see condoms flying around in Mount Fuji in the background. Okay, this was for the Utne Reader. And they asked me to do a piece about Buddhism, the Tibetan style, and kind of California interpretation of Buddhism. They wanted a split composition with one style on one side and one on the other. At that time, the space shuttle was going up. So you have like Phoenix on one side and then the space shuttle on the other side of it. And the colors reflect the two different cultures, kind of sunny California and the kind of darker, bleaker, more serious Tibetan style. Okay, anybody recognize this guy? He was in the news within the past year. It was a big story from Japan. Anybody remember? Somebody's going, it was sarin gas, and this is a bad guy. You remember? Okay, so anybody remember his name? Shoko Asahara, and he was the head of a cult in Japan, and he launched the sarin gas on the Tokyo subway, so people died in that. It was a big deal. But guess what? This happened around 1995, and they didn't nail him. He was executed within the last year. That's how long it took to move through the courts and everything. So anyway, they asked me to do this illustration. They sent me a reference photo with a blue gown on the terrorist. It turns out he wore white, blue, and pink. And then they asked me to change it to pink, so I had to change that, but it came out pretty good. And this was for, I think, a show in Koreatown. It's called Saint. When I was a kid, my grandmother and aunts used to take us all down to Tijuana, and I felt really sorry for those, they're like donkeys that they paint like zebras. So this is kind of a combination of the Tijuana imagery, all the little coin banks and the stuff that you buy when you're going back to the US, combined with the Indian Mughal miniature style. Okay, so I used to contribute every year to the Long Beach Museum's benefit auction, and I didn't have an idea one year, so I just went over to the beach and took a picture of a pigeon and went home and painted it. So that's my pigeon. Okay, this is another one for Time Magazine. I did a series for them. Does anybody recognize that aircraft off the top of your head? It's a historic aircraft. They actually focused the whole exhibition around this aircraft. It has to do with World War II. Yes, Enola Gay, the one that dropped the bomb over Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So here's the story. There's a group in the US, the China, Burma, India Society or something like that, CBI. My dad was in it. My dad actually flew over the hump, and he was in China for 2 years during World War II. It was his veterans group that contested a show at the Smithsonian Institution. And the reason was that it was about the Enola Gay, but the veterans that actually served in that war felt that it was too sympathetic to the Japanese point of view. I mean, obviously they were bombed, they had an opinion about it, but the veterans felt that the whole thing was skewed a little too much, skewed to the liberal or left, and that in fact people risked their lives going over there to fight the Japanese, plus the Japanese started it by bombing Pearl Harbor. So it was this huge thing going on, and this illustration came out, and my dad said, but it was my group that initiated that controversy. But I was totally with the Japanese side, I mean, I did understand, and I'm really proud of him for serving in that, but the whole bombing thing was just so terrifying and so terrible. Okay, self-portraits. For a while, I got really interested in doing self-portraits. For some reason, I have not done one of these in about 15 years, but I thought you might like to see. So this is me around 1989, and that's my dog at the time. Her name is Sheila. I think I have to come around to this side to show you a detail on this. Excuse me. So, can you see a tattoo there on the forehead? Okay. If you get up close, that's my parents in the 1940s. And my mom has like, a mink on and looks really glamorous. And my dad looks handsome. I kind of was getting into my 30s thinking how much of an impact our parents have on us, the way that we think and our morality and our vision. So I tell everyone the dog also has a tattoo of her parents, but it's under the fur. Oh, wrong one. Here we go. So I did this painting, I think this was around 1993, and this one's called Redhead. You can see the fabric design comes from Japanese futons. I've been to Japan on 4 extended visits, most recently around 2000. I love to go on Sunday morning, go to the temples, and they have these flea markets spread out across the temples. They always have antique fabrics, and the futon fabrics look like that. And these patterns have symbolism for longevity and health, and scholarship and prosperity. So they're beautiful and they have meaning within that culture. Why did I do myself with these crazy things happening on the face? Well, the first couple of times I went to Japan, I was staying with a Japanese family, the extended family of my boyfriend. And I felt so out of place. For one thing, I'm half Irish and I blush very easily. So I was always beet red and everyone around me looks perfect. Like their skin and everything, they're just well coiffed and they're looking at me like, This woman is like turning beet red, and I don't know why. And the other thing is I just felt too large because I was 5'8" and about the same weight I am now, and everyone is really tiny and, you know, gorgeous. So I'd like lean back and crash through a shoji screen. They have like paper walls there, you know, where I'd break my chopsticks. It's sort of awkward in Japan. So that one, oh, and let me tell you something else about that one. So initially this was called gaijin. Does anyone know what gaijin means in Japanese? Yeah, it means you're a foreigner, right? But nobody got it. So I was teaching at Santa Ana College at the time, and I had a break, you know, a 15-minute break with my class. So they went downstairs, and I thought, I went downstairs. Somebody was doing a docent tour of a show, and it was a group show, and they had asked for that painting. So I was listening to the docent, and everyone was calling that one, well, who did the redhead? Tell me about the redhead. I thought, you know, that's a better title. So I changed it. The other thing I overheard when I went around with, or listened in on that group, is the instructor or the docent said, what do you think about that painting? What do you think that artist meant? And this one guy, just very straightforward, he goes, I don't want to know a word about it. I would rather interpret it myself. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's what I wanted. I didn't want anyone to explain to them what it meant. I thought actually it kind of stood on its own. So, okay, around the same time I did this one. So here's a funny story about it. I have this friend, Peter Zukoski, who's also a very accomplished painter. I don't know if he's ever spoken with you all, but he'd be a good person to get if he hasn't. But anyway, so we were kind of doing some parallel work at that time. And I put this together from a figurative photo that a friend had taken of me on the roof of one of my old apartments with a mandrill baboon head. I was born in the year of the monkey. I just thought it went together really well. And anyway, Peter came over to the house and he goes, that's really weird. And I said, well, thank you. You know, what else can you tell me? And he said, well, you got to come over to my studio to see what I'm working on. And I did. He had a mandrill baboon body with his portrait as a human on it. We hadn't talked about it or anything. It was just great. Let's see, there was some other story about this. Oh yeah, okay. So I get migraine headaches, and the National Headache Foundation thought that this was about migraines because of the waves around it. It actually doesn't have anything to do with migraines, but they put it in an exhibition because they thought it was auras from migraine. This is a piece. I was teaching my students how to do marbling, and I decided to go into a sheet of marbled paper and do watercolor and pastel on top of it. That was pretty fun. Okay, so this is around late 1990s. This is a 40 by 30 inch watercolor painting. It's a little washed out on the screen. It's much punchier in person. My husband Mark and I got involved in trying to save Native American burial grounds in Southern California. So we went to the Coso Range, which is up at Ridgecrest, California. Anyone ever been up there? It's off the 395. You gotta go. There's a place called the Matarango Museum. They will take you on a tour through the China Lake Naval Weapons Station, and you can see more than 10,000 petroglyphs. It's like you're hiking through the Grand Canyon, and there's rock art on the left and right in front of you, and you walk all the way down this canyon, have your lunch hanging off the end looking at the landscape, and then walk all the way back, and you see different rock art on the way back because of the way the light's hitting it. So you see a whole new assemblage of just incredible rock art. So we were actually suing the city of Seal Beach where we lived, and I was working on this series that integrated my own face with some of the rock art that we were enjoying from Southern California and learning about. So this one is called White Monkey, and at that time I was teaching full-time, probably at Santiago Canyon. I don't remember which college. I've taught at 8 or 9 of them. And I had the feeling that maybe our focus on math and science is too weak, and other countries where they are stronger on that academically, they have a better chance. So the monkey is me, and the colors are red, white, and blue. And it's kind of a sense that actually it's almost like a suicidal thing. He's about to jump into the waterfall, and he has this little cart full of produce, but there's an animal in it eating the produce. So it was kind of a political statement about how I felt education was going at that time. Okay, so I lived in Highland Park for a while and I collected toys, and these are from Toys R Us. They're a couple of blue Godzillas. And I used to go to the farmer's market, not farmers, the flower market downtown and get my favorite flowers and then set up still lifes on the roof of my apartment and take pictures. So this is called Double Trouble. It's a little watercolor. Okay, so in the 2000s, I went up to San Francisco, met with a friend from art school, and we went to Chinatown for dinner. They have all these great little shops. This is around Union Street and Grant Street. I picked up this great little puppet head, paper mache head, and that's the head on this critter in the center. Around the same time, I went to Oaxaca because I got really interested in the Mexican carved folk animals. So I came into the kitchen to make some tea, and my husband Mark over here had popped this little puppet head from San Francisco on top of this jaguar figure from Mexico, and it just looked like it belonged together. It was an absolutely perfect hybridization of those two critters. So I developed this little composition. Anybody know what the blue cat is? It's from Japanese animation. Starts with a D. Okay, well, it's like Mickey Mouse if you're Japanese or Taiwanese, and his name is Doraemon. And he has a pocket. I don't know if you can see it in this painting, but it's probably in others I'll show next. Oh, I wanted to show you, once again, this is the beginning of a painting, and that's the finish. So you can see the layering process that takes place from the initial phase to the completion. I work in thin layers of watercolor, and you have to build it up over time. So it could take a couple of weeks or even months to finish a large painting. So this one has the Doraemon character, but he's in a Halloween costume, and it integrates creatures from Japanese hell scrolls. Oops, wrong direction. Okay, let's go forward again. Here's another one. This one's from about 2004, and we have Doraemon and the jaguar guy and a scene with fire. So it's about the California drought. And again, the imagery comes from the hell scrolls. Okay, so around 2006, we had moved to a new house, and it had bird feeders in the backyard, lots of them. And they were attracting a lot of birds, but they were also attracting a lot of feral cats. So there was kind of a war going on every day. We'd put food out, birds would come, cats would show up and try and pick off the birds. Okay, so we have a parade. This is actually from a Japanese woodblock print that had a procession of figures going to Mount Fuji for Buddhist redemption. But I've got a cat in a tree looking down on the birds as prey. And you can see the lanterns, instead of having Japanese crests on them, they're kind of anti-cat symbol. And this one, I believe, was done in the Asian zodiac year of the rooster. So over there, that calligraphy says rooster. I didn't want to put the date on these, so I thought I'd do the animal zodiac. So then you look at it and go, okay, it was the year of the rooster. That could have been that could have been 2019, or it could have been 2003. Or, my math's off, but you get the picture. I think it was 2008 that I did that one. Okay, so I also like to do stuff that's less like animation and more like traditional painting. I was playing around with silhouettes of birds from a photo on a light box. And the way I had them layered up, it created a kind of abstraction between the levels that looked so cool. I just wanted to paint that. So this is actually ravens flying around in the sky at dawn. This is a painting that I did in about 2012, and it's coming from Japanese woodblock prints once again. It's a triptych. Have any of you studied Japanese woodblock prints very much? Okay, did you know they make them so that you can either look at the left side, the right side, or the center as a concrete composition, complete composition, or you can put them together and they form a longer narrative that also works. So on this one, we have a character on the right from Japanese mythology. This cat with the DDT is, her name is Kasha, and so she's got DDT. And then we have the creatures like the frog and the snail who are getting wiped out by our overuse of Roundup and DDT and chemicals like that. So I did this painting and sat around my gallery and didn't do much of anything for a while, but it wound up having a much larger life, and I'll tell you about that in a minute or two. This is another piece from the Cat and Bird series. So actually, I should go ahead a couple to explain this one better. So in this painting, you can see studio with a cat barging in, and we have a number of different birds that are printing woodblock prints that are wanted posters. Okay, so each one has a different cat on it, and they're printing these up to post around town, right? So that they can nail these cats that are picking them off. And for this, I was on MySpace. That's how long ago this was. It was before Facebook. But I asked friends in Japan what their cats' names were. And then I have a friend who's Japanese, and she helped me get the calligraphy right so that each one of these posters actually has a name, like, you know, whatever that cat's name was. So that actually preceded this painting. And you can see, here's one of the wanted posters, right? Okay, and here's the cat's foot on the hem of the kimono. But what they don't know is under the kimono, she has an AK-47. She's not worried. She can take care of herself. Okay, so then these guys, we have again the war between birds and cats. And they're saying things like, you know, what a tiny bird. Is that an insect or a bird? And then the one that's getting poked in the nose at the top is saying, itai, like that hurts. So that's from the same series. I thought you might like to see the line work preceding a watercolor painting. This is pretty complex. So I had to work that out first. And the way that I do it is by doing different sections on tracing paper, putting them on a light box, and then tracing that through onto the watercolor paper, and then inking it and painting it with black watercolor. For the straight lines, like in this trellis thing over here in the window, that's done with pen and ink. And the banisters, that's all done with pen and ink. But the curved lines are all done with a brush. So once that's done, you can lay in the colors. Okay, this is another one from the cats and the birds. Now, there's a character in Japanese folklore called a tengu. It's this thing. It's a mountain dog, but it looks like a bird. So it's a kind of a battle between this creature that isn't quite a bird, but still resents the cat for picking off birds. Oops, wrong one. Once again, here's Besiege. This is a watercolor of the war between cats and birds. And that's what it looks like finished. That's what it looks like when I was first starting it. By the time I'm finished with one of these paintings, it's going to have up to 10, maybe even 12 layers of paint on it. Okay, this one, my godson was playing with a video game called Katamara. We Love Katamara, I think. Katamari. So in the game, we were watching him play it, and you have this big ball, and you roll it around with your little remote thing, and it picks stuff up. So it'll pick up first paper clips, and then bigger things like teacups, and then it'll roll up a car, and then it'll roll up a whole freeway. And you try and get the thing as big as possible before your time's up. So I was thinking, okay, if this is the Edo period in Japan, and I have this ferret with this ball, what is he going to be picking up? So I went to Hokusai's art and looked at some of the animals and things that he painted. And this is called Ferret Loves Katamari. So it's kind of a combination of the two. This piece, if later on, if you want to take a look, I've got a really nice print of it over here. It's called 9 Lives. And in this case, you've got an Oban festival, which is kind of like the Day of the Dead here, November 1st. Oban happens in August, and it's for people to celebrate the lives of their loved ones that are departed. So they go out and they'll take candles and put them on paper boats and put them in the river, and they'll dance and eat sushi and wear cotton kimono and dance with their friends, and then they'll watch the little flames go off in the water. So the thing going on with Oban, and they're eating crab sushi, and underneath we have the crabs And they actually have dynamite and a clock and matches, and they're ready to blow this whole thing up. So it's kind of a combination of concern about international situation now with ISIS and things like that going on, and just kind of political situation between different animals. So this one is probably the greatest anomaly of my work. It's called Red Mount Fuji, and it's about as far toward Hallmark as I get with my art. Guess which one of my pieces has sold the best? This one. You know, it's kind of sweet, and I love the way the mom's holding her baby up and all that. A little bit about art history. In the background over here, we have a couple of turtles that echo the thing going on with the cats. And they're from Hokusai's manga, but Hokusai did them in black and white in his manga, which are like how to draw manuals that Hokusai produced in the mid-19th century. So this one is called Next Exit, and I did this around 2008. It was in a show at Copland del Rio. We have a cowboy on an elephant. Now, the elephant is kind of because of the Republican Party, but it's also because my husband's from New Jersey, and there was a community in New Jersey where they had a giant elephant that was actually this big. It was like 2 stories tall that you could go inside of, and it was kind of an advertisement for a development of seashore cottages that you could buy. They built it in 1880 and it's still there. I forget what its name is. I think it's Lucy. Anyway, you can still go inside Lucy. There still is a Lucy. It burned down twice and they just rebuilt it. But what I was thinking is I was concerned about war, international war in the Middle East, and over-reliance on petroleum products and so many things going on, and the cowboy mentality. So we had this guy cracking a whip on this elephant on top of it. This painting took 6 years. I kept putting it in the closet, working on other things, bringing it back out. Okay, this one is more recent, and let's see, this one is called Underwater World. Do you guys remember in Japan they had a major earthquake and yeah, tsunami, that's the word, in 2012, I'm pretty sure. And we also had a recession here in 2009, and a lot of people were still underwater on their house at that time. So it's kind of about family cohesion and trying to keep the little tribes safe and together. And also my sympathy for the people in Japan and also for the people in our country and common bonds. Okay, this one's based on the Coppertone ad, the tan don't burn. I have to stay in pretty much during the daytime because I constantly have these like skin cancers ticked off me. I'm such a pale howly. So anyway, I've been spending a lot more time doing things at night lately. So that was the idea here. I had a lot of fun playing with the turtle and making it in the exact position as the dog from the Coppertone ad. And this one is called, let's see, is from the Soba Blues series. This one is about 2009. So we didn't know which way, I think it was actually 2008, we didn't know which way the election was going to go. So as litmus test was the idea. We don't know if we're going to have a Republican or a Democrat or what's going on politically. But I also just like everything about this painting. I can't sell this one. I mean, I don't want to sell this one. It's just like my painting. I love the color. This is Raijin Tiger. This is a combination of printmaking and watercolor. He has a pattern on his little shorts there. So I figured out that I could use a chemical called xylene to transfer huge blocks of pattern. But Raijin is actually a god of lightning and thunder in Buddhism, Shinto Buddhism. But I wanted to change him from a human, which is the original version by Kuniyoshi, to a tiger. So I think I have. You can see what Kuniyoshi's version looked like in 1840. And then you can see my Raijin tiger around 2010. More recent work. Okay, this one is the 1%. This is a Night Parade of 100 Demons. People often ask me what the calligraphy means. Well, the guy in the center is the 1%. He's got all the acorns. Oops, wrong button, sorry. So he's got a ton of acorns that are actually carved into little skulls. And then this guy is really nicely dressed, so he's the 2%. And that calligraphy says the 2%. I'm over here dressed like a peasant. That says like 0%. That's me. That's coming from a Kunisada composition that had humans that had nothing to do with this. And this one, let's see, this is a combination of a Colima dog from Mexico superimposed with a Japanese pattern. Off the top of my head, I think this is called Karakusa pattern. This actually came from the wrong button, sorry. The Middle East by way of India and found its way into Japan. And a curious thing about this pattern is, you know how we have like bandanas, like hobos carry a bandana and it's got all their stuff in it? Well, that pattern, they use that for that in Japan. They put together a bundle with that pattern on it. It's a very, very common traditional pattern. This is another hybridization between Mexican art and Japanese. We have a Japanese samurai textile pattern behind a Oaxaca alebrije, or hand-carved animal. That one's a jaguar. This is from the same series about toys, Japanese toys, and some Mexican patterns incorporated. This one is actually a combination of my art with a Japanese artist. His name is Tadaomi Shibuya. And you can see in the center of the painting, you guys see the monkey face there? Okay. So he became really famous for doing geometric style animals like that on walls. They're huge. They're murals in Japan.
It's an interactive
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. So anyway, I love this monkey, and I had a big show coming up. This is like 2 years ago. And I wanted to incorporate it in my painting because I'm a Gemini. I was born in the year of the monkey. I love that kind of street art, and I really desperately wanted to use it. So I started doing the painting, and I also tried to get in touch with this artist at the same time because I wasn't going to show the painting until I knew I had his permission to integrate it and to show it and to do, you know, this like joint painting. He wasn't answering. So my dealer came over to the house. I go, Greg, I don't know what to do. I'm in love with this painting. And he goes, well, you can't show it. It's, you know, what do I do? And he goes, just send him an email. Tell him that you're going to assume it's okay to use it if you don't hear back from him in 48 hours. So I did. And he wrote back and said, I love it. Go ahead and do it. No problem. Put my name on it. So that worked out really well. This is from the same series. And these are Olmec heads from Mexico floating around with Chinese and Japanese puppet heads. Around that time, my friend Greg taught me how to paddleboard. It was so much fun. So I had to work that into my art. I was also getting a little tired of just doing Japanese style all the time. So this incorporates Mexican, Tibetan, Japanese, and God knows what else. Similarly, born in the year of the monkey, the show was in the year of the monkey. I was turning 60. So this is me as like a white monkey paddleboarder in a Tibetan backdrop. And from that, the thing about the Oban series and the Day of the Dead, you can see the little paper origami boats that have wicks in them and are lit. So candles. Okay, and this one is from that Hell Scroll series. We have a figure who you're probably familiar with. I had to take this down because we see enough of this guy on television. I didn't want to waltz in my house as well. So this one is called Wind Demon. And that painting that they didn't know what to do with, that didn't sell for 5 years, that my dealer was having a fit about, wound up being the focal point of a show at the Worcester Museum, which was called Samurai, and had modern interpretations of samurai, and the museum wound up buying it, so that one had a happy ending. And that's all. So thank you so much for your patience with me. I hope you have a question or two. I would love to answer. Questions? Yeah.
Your pieces have a sense of humor. It seems like it's a seed of where you start. Is it hard to keep that humor as you develop?
What a great question. Is it hard? I think if there isn't humor in it, it's hard for me to do. I'm fairly politically active and involved, and if I just said what I think, nobody'd want to look at it. So I have to always try and integrate beauty, humor, or both in order to make the piece appealing enough that maybe people would get my message. Thank you. Other questions? I hope.
What's the largest piece you've ever worked
it's about the size of a door because that's what I stretched it on. Yeah, I did a piece when we were involved in the whole Native American burial ground thing that took up a whole door, and that hung in the library at one of the colleges that I taught at.
What's your preferred scale to work on?
I've always liked small. I'm comfortable working this size or twice as large. And part of it is that we live in a tiny little ranch house from the 40s. There's not much room in there. So I have one of the child bedrooms, you know. I'm kind of limited. I'm just working about this big most of the time. And I think maybe people work huge, but the paintings aren't always strong enough to work huge, right? I like the intimacy. It's like reading a book when you can get right up to something and have it at a small scale. Yeah.
I'm curious about the beautiful print you have there.
Oh,
What type of print is that, and how did you have that done?
which one are you talking about?
The
long one.
That was a print?
Yes, that is a print. The actual painting is twice that big. We were lucky enough, Mark has a dear friend from high school who recently moved from LA where he worked for Disney. His wife's an architect, so she became the head of her practice. They moved to Santa Barbara. They gave us this printer she used to use for blueprints. And we found that we could make really beautiful art prints out of it. So that is a giclée, which means an inkjet print from the painting, and the color, the tightness, everything about it. It looks exactly like the painting. I'm very happy with it. And this one actually is printed on a canvas from a watercolor. So I wanted to try that out. That one is made by Society 6. I just got it in the mail this week. I wanted to see if they look as good on canvas as they do on paper. The piece on the far right was actually commissioned for a show about trains. And so this one, gosh, I'm blanking on the title at the moment, but I decided to do something again with current politics. So this cat actually has a little forelock like Trump. It's called Wild Ride. That's what the title of it is. So it's like a cat, but it's holding a monkey wrench and it's riding on this train. And what gave me the idea for it was they said, we love your cat series. Can you do something that's contemporary and political and ties in with trains? We're going to have a whole wall of Meiji period ukiyo-e prints of trains. And we'd like to see you contemporize that. So that was really fun, right? And I started looking at all these different trains. We started watching this Jeremy Brett series that was Sherlock Holmes, but it was made in the 90s in Britain. Did anybody ever see that?
Yeah.
Jeremy Brett's so great, isn't he? So he's in here. He's a cat. You can see the meerschaum pipes. But the funny thing is, when I did the cat as a conductor, you could barely see it. It didn't really look that great. So then I started thinking, trains. I'd look it up and do a Google search. And I found Walt Disney, right? He had one of these train sets in his backyard that he'd ride, and he was about that scale on it, right? So I worked from that, and I developed the cat and tried to get the hair right on the cat, and Mark modeled for the monkey wrench. And then I put it together. So this is a Hiroshige background. I made up the whole train, and the other little characters are all made up. It was done in the year of the rooster, which, by the way, my name is Hahn, H-A-H-N, which is German for rooster. So it's